Welcome to the Doyenne of Death podcast, funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. It's all about end-of-life issues and getting the conversation started about our 100% mortality rate. This series is hosted by Gail Rubin, certified thanatologist and the Doyenne of Death. A doyenne is a woman who's considered senior in a group and knows a lot about a particular subject. Well, that's Gail. She knows all about creating the party no one wants to plan, a funeral or memorial service. She discusses the changes death can bring, and she'll make you laugh. This series includes episodes previously released as A Good Goodbye, a treasure trove of evergreen podcasts about funeral planning issues. This podcast reveals some of the mysteries and shares advice and tools that can reduce stress at times of grief, minimize family conflict, and help create a good goodbye. Remember, just as talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead, and your family will benefit from the conversation. So, here to talk about the subjects we sometimes avoid is author, speaker, and the Doyenne of Death, Gail Rubin.
On February 2nd of 2014, an essay titled Ashes to Ashes, but First a Nice Pine Box appeared in the New York Times Sunday Review section. It was written by Dr. Jeffrey Piehler, and when I read his opinion piece, I felt I needed to find him and invite him to be on the program today to provide us with his great insights about accepting mortality and celebrating life. And I'm very pleased to have Dr. Jeffrey Piehler with me on the line today for today's show. Welcome.
Welcome to you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Piehler, you are a retired thoracic surgeon. You live near Kansas City, and you wrote about building your own coffin and how you came to do this. Would you mind explaining to the audience a little bit about your situation and what brought you to do this?
Sure. I've had, when I was 54 years old, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I'm 66 now. Mm-hmm. And I went through the initial evaluation, and I had surgery, and we initially had some hopes that would take care of it, but the disease recurred, and it basically kept recurring despite radiation therapy and then multiple chemotherapy options and immunotherapy and hormone therapy and, all the stuff that you can throw at prostate cancer. And for about the last maybe 4.5 to 5 years, I've had extensive metastatic disease to my bone. So I am stage 4 prostate cancer. I am categorically incurable. Although, when one talks about years with stage 4 disease, obviously one has to say, well, things have gone better than stage 4 disease treats a lot of other people, and I would be the first to admit that. But the truth is that I'm running out of options, and I think that every oncologist that I've been to would be in agreement that I'm getting close to losing this fight that I've had with this disease. So in that context, I attended a funeral last summer, and it was a horribly tragic funeral. It was a 19-year-old boy. It was a very close friend of my daughter's who died of an accidental drug overdose. And no one knew he was taking drugs, and it was just one of these horrible things. And I was sitting in the congregation, and he had an open casket, and it was a very plush affair. It looked like it weighed 10 tons, this behemoth of mahogany and the casket was open, and there he was, and I looked at that, and I've done a lot of thinking about my own funeral because I'm sort of a controlling sort of guy, as most surgeons are. And I said, I'm just not comfortable in a big mahogany plush box like that. So I knew that they were going to cremate this young man, and so obviously he was just, and it was pretty obvious they weren't going to burn up this box. And I don't know, there were just too many incongruities for me. Now, let me just quickly say that I have absolutely no criticism of anyone who makes those decisions to put, someone in something like that. There's nothing more personal than those choices, and that's fine. It just wasn't for me. And I looked at that and I said, I'm just kind of a plain pine box kind of guy, and I kind of thought some more, and I said, the way to kind of come to grips with that desire to be a little more pure and simple, and at the same time to kind of get to grips with the fact that I'm dying, would be to make my own box. And so that was the germ behind starting this whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I'd like to mention is there is the possibility that young man's casket was a rental casket. People can do that, and then.
Oh, I'm sure it was. No, I'm sure.
Oh, okay.
It was. Yeah. That's what I mean. That's why I know that they weren't going to put that into the flames.
Right.
Yeah.
But then what you did write about is very often people are cremated in alternative containers, which are very often recycled cardboard, and you thought you wanted something a little more, pure or just elemental. You and wood.
Yep. I think that's true. I even though old pizza containers are made of wood at some point in their existence, there's something about being part of that recycled process that didn't really strike me as what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so the option of going back one step, going in the chain of what should I say, the chain of production of everything that's around us, and bypassing the pizza containers and the first drafts and the ice cream containers, and going back all those things that go into recycled material, I thought I'd go back to the very basic, which is the wood that it all came from.
Well, and very interesting, in your essay you talk about that you actually used recycled wood that I guess used to be in a...
Yeah, that is true. I have absolutely no woodworking skills whatsoever. I can use my hands, obviously, as a surgeon. I was pretty comfortable with that, but I had no woodworking skills, and so. But I was immediately rescued from that fault by a good friend who is an artist who works in a number of different modalities, but especially wood. And so I looked up this is my friend Peter here in Kansas City, and I spoke with him about the project. And Peter has a shop, and there certainly was no small hurdle, and maybe you want to talk about this at some point, no small hurdle getting both his approval and my family's approval for all this. But in his shop, he did have some boards which he had rescued from the demolition of an old factory. And these were 6 to 8 inches wide, yellow pine, about they're kind of varying thickness, 1 to 2 inches thick, and they just looked awful. But he said, Jeff, you scrape off what's on the outside of these, and you will be amazed at what's inside. And it turns out he was right. But there certainly was an initial hurdle getting my family on board for this project.
Well, and in fact, you start out your column, talking about your wife's reaction when you informed her after you all have a nice glass of wine and seem relaxed that you're going to build your own coffin, and it didn't quite go
She was absolutely horrified. Maybe even worse than horrified. There was this moment of sort of disbelief, and then then why in the world would you want to do that? And I'd have to say that when I present this concept to other people, that's pretty much their idea too. Why in the world would you want to do this? But then my wife, being a wife, she has the prerogatives of saying, "Stop! Don't do it." I said, "Well, we'll just talk about it some other time." And I have to say, I really did push it too far that night. This wasn't in the article, but I said I was, this was really pushing my luck. I said, well, and while we're at it, I could have my son Ben, who is 26 years old. He could come down and help with a little sanding and kind of work on it too. And that was the straw that really put her over the edge. I mean, she said, absolutely no.
Now, why do you think she did that?
Well,
what?
I think there were two things going on. I think that her, for sure, her reaction was one that most people have, was that this is going to channel all my energy into something which is morose, something which is not positive, something which is going to be a constant reminder of death. So I think, and that is absolutely the reaction that I've had with most people when I bring this up.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I threw my son into the mix, that's maybe a little more complicated in that I think that we wanted to maybe protect my two youngest children, aged 26 and 24, maybe protect them a little bit. They're both a little more vulnerable, and we thought maybe they should kind of get into this pretty slowly and not so abruptly.
Yeah. Jeff, we're going to take a little quick break here, but we'll continue the conversation when we come back.
Okay.
Thanks.
Gail Rubin, the Doyenne of Death, has been producing Before I Die festivals for years. These festivals get end-of-life planning conversations started by putting the fun in funeral planning. Outside-the-box activities break down barriers to discussing death and planning for our 100% mortality rate. And now, Gail has created the Before I Die Festival in a Box, the comprehensive guide to producing your own community festival. It includes everything you need to create a successful event: how to find sponsors, build a team, market the event, schedule speakers, topics for discussion, workshop ideas, and much, much more. To learn how to get your Before I Die Festival in a Box, visit beforeidiefestivals.com or call 505-265-7215.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Jeff Piehler, who wrote a really interesting essay in the New York Times that ran on February 2nd about building his own coffin for his eventual demise, which you had written because you are a retired thoracic surgeon. As they say in medical speak, you're getting close to circling the drain, or something along those lines.
That's it, circling the drain.
Yeah. So I love your honest approach to mortality and the fact that you wanted to be involved in this project, and yet the reaction of family and friends is like, oh, that's so morbid. Yet it sounds like you found it to be very life-affirming.
I absolutely. This was a project that Well, let me just say it was never a woodworking project. It was never a couple of guys getting together, drinking beer, and making something out of wood. Peter and I knew from the outset that this was something different, that we were making, something that had a deep meaning, and was making a statement. And it's hard to be totally trivial, although, we had many, many light moments, and we did drink a lot of beer. But it's hard to be totally trivial when you're laying on the floor and someone's making an outline of your body with a pencil to see how big a piece of wood you need underneath you in your coffin. And it's a very sobering process. But as it turned out, we did indeed start out with the idea that we were building this, but at some point it became apparent, and without words, to both of us, that really the coffin was building us. And it continued to do that, and actually continues to do that. And I think that if I have time to talk to people about it, then the people sort of pause, and I get the little look of, oh, well, okay. And that was the point behind the article, was people are so terrified to talk about dying. And what I have found is that by building this box, it's sort of a green light for me to think about my death in positive terms, and also it's a green light for others to feel at ease to talk about it with me. And both of those arenas have been immensely profitable to me in terms of how I view death and how comfortable I am in accepting the fact that I'm going to die. And I don't know when I'm going to die, but it's not going to be too terribly long from now.
Mm-hmm. One of the sentences that you wrote was, while the coffin is indeed a reminder of what awaits us all, its true message is to live every moment in its greatest potential.
I think that summarizes it. And people talk about the fight against cancer, and I don't know how many of your audience are dealing with cancer or who have dealt with cancer, but really, I think most people with cancer sort of resent that term, because you really don't feel like you're fighting. This is something that you really have no control over, and this idea of fighting is not a good one. And you're doing the best you can. And the idea that the coffin is somehow resigning yourself to the fact that you're giving up this desire to live is exactly the opposite of the truth. I found that by just knowing that this box is there, I have a concrete reminder of the most elemental of all human conditions besides birth, and that's death. And it's going to happen, and it's going to happen to everyone listening. And I guess even those not listening. and
they can listen later on the podcast.
There you go. And I think that the obligation is not to get all bound up in the fact that we're going to die and bury your head from living. It's really quite the opposite. What you need to do is to accept that, and then make the very best of every moment that you have. And for me, that's what this project has done, and that's what the box does. It's not only a symbol of that, and that's not defiance at all. It's just acknowledging the fact. But it's sort of a gentle reminder to me that every day deserves your very best, and that includes seeing the miracles that are out there all around you every day, and it includes being a better person every day, and it includes being incredibly grateful for what you have. And that's what the box tells me, and that's what the process of making it imparted on me.
Mm-hmm. And it gave you perspective, too. You wrote that it's pretty much impossible to feel anger at someone for driving too slowly in front of you in traffic when you've just come from sanding your own coffin.
That is certainly true. That is certainly true. Pretty much everything falls into line when you're, and that's what you're doing in your spare time. I think just going a little deeper into that, I think that, all of us are born pretty pure, and we're issued a knapsack at some early time in our life, and we start adding bricks to that knapsack as we go through life, and the bricks are not all good. A lot of them are, short-temperedness and anger and materialism and jealousy and holding grudges and, all these bad things that we all kind of carry around with us. And if you do the one simple thing, well, maybe it's not so simple, I don't know, but it's come around to be simple for me, which is to just accept the fact that you're going to die. Then all of a sudden, it's like, that there's a hand coming in there and just unloading those bricks just as fast as they have ever been put in there. And you find that you view life in a totally different way. You see grace in strangers. When I go out to pick up my newspaper in the morning, I go to the end of the driveway, stop, and I listen to two cardinals talking to each other, and I'm just absolutely mesmerized at the beauty of that communication between those two birds. And I wave at people driving by on their way to work, and I see beauty in the smiles. It's a very different way to live, and I think it's sort of the default position of man. And unfortunately, you can't quite get there until you accept the fact that you're going to die. You don't have to be actually, have terminal cancer, but our society doesn't want to take that step of saying, yep, this is what's going to happen, and then I need to kind of put my life in order, taking that into account. And, I think if you do that, so much of human behavior is absolute folly, acquiring things and all this. It's so foolish. And, really what's important, really, when you get down to it, are human relationships. It's all loving family, loving friends, and this whole process has brought me so much closer to my family. And I've found friends, especially including Peter, but others too, that I never dreamt that I would have of this quality in my life. And all I've done is accept the obvious, that I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm. And do the family and friends, have they adjusted and kind of incorporated that attitude as well?
Well, it's, everyone has to kind of work their own way along this trail. And it's fair to say we don't all go together. Mm-hmm. And there have been many times where I think it's fair to say I've always been further along the trail than other members of my family. But that's perhaps the way it's going to be. They're going to lose me, and they're going to have to do, in many ways, more of the hard work of grieving, and they're going to do more hard work than I am. I just got to lay there and let it happen. Mm-hmm. So I think it's fair to say that they have been not as always in the same place that I am. On the other hand, my wife and I we talk all the time about when I'm not here. Mm-hmm. And, we've done all the obvious things, which everyone should do, the things like, wills and make sure that things are titled right and, all that kind of stuff, which I'm sure this audience is very familiar with.
Well, I'm always harping about that.
That's kind of a given here. And
but we need to take a little break at this point. I'm sorry. But when we come back, we'll continue the conversation and talk about what you and your wife are talking about, when you are not here anymore.
Gail Rubin, the Doyenne of Death, is the author of 3 award-winning books. In A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die, learn how to save money, reduce family conflict, and minimize stress at a time of grief. Just as talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead, and your family will benefit from the conversation. Kicking the Bucket List, 100 downsizing and organizing things to do before you die, brings a light touch to downsizing and organizing for end-of-life issues. And Hail and Farewell, Cremation Ceremonies, Templates and Tips, helps you easily create meaningful memorial services with sample scripts, suggested readings, and music recommendations. These fine books by Gail Rubin, The Doyenne of Death, are available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. For more information, visit agoodgoodbye.com.
Thanks for listening. This is part 1 of our 2-part episode. Stay tuned for part 2 coming next week.
Thank you for joining us on the Doyenne of Death podcast. You can find episodes of this podcast and past episodes of A Good Goodbye with Gail Rubin on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on Gail's work, visit agoodgoodbye.com.